Collin Graves is the founder and CEO of North Labs, a leading fractional cloud data analytics firm. Before founding North Labs, Collin served with distinction in NATO Special Operations during his tenure with the US Air Force and continues to serve the community today by mentoring transitioning military veterans and inner-city youth. In this conversation, we unpack the spirit of the entrepreneur, lessons taken from the military, leadership, and taking a pragmatic approach to data and analytics.
Hey, first off, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. And as we chat, I really, I want to hear about North Labs and, all the data and analytics stuff. But I also want to learn, a little more about you, because you have a really interesting story. So I guess we can start off with, who is Collin Graves and what do you do for North Labs?
Oh, bit of a loaded question. Yeah, right off the bat. I've been in the cloud space for a long time. I got started with Amazon Web Services back in 2007. So I am
the beginnings.
The beginning. There were 2 AWS services back then, if you can imagine, and was lucky enough to hitch my cart to arguably the fastest horse in the space. And thankfully, I did, because it's all I know at this point. But I was really early on in becoming fully certified as an engineer with AWS when they rolled out their training and certification program. I think I was one of the first 10 folks in the world to get fully certified, and actually ran and sold a very early cloud partner with Amazon back from 2010 to 2014, where essentially we were building, if you can imagine, we were building Dropbox type of solutions for construction firms who needed to share large files in the field with 3G cellular. And then, of course, a brilliant engineering mind came along named Drew Houston and started this concept of SaaS for file management that was completely foreign to me. And he became a billionaire, and I still run companies today. But at North Labs, I founded it in 2016. We are an all-in AWS partner, particularly focused on the manufacturing and industrial side of data analytics and AI. So it's definitely changed over time as the landscape has changed. But my day-to-day today is really to serve as the guy who jumps on grenades on behalf of my team, because they really don't need much of me in the day-to-day operation anymore, which is, trust me, that's a good thing.
It's funny. You were the smart one. So in 2007, I remember around the time AWS was hitting, and where I worked at the time, it wasn't a DevOps team. It was like a load balancer team. I can't remember. It was like a blend of some application developers and folks that manage load balancers. And they came to us and they said, "This cloud thing's going to be big. It's going to be big. We need to get in front of it." And I was like, "There's no way this is ever going to take off." Yep. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. I'm an expert. And boy, I am proud to call it out. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, but I couldn't see at the time, like, big organizations like financial services, in that market wanting to put their intellectual property in someone else's data center. I was one of the naysayers in the very beginning, but I'm fully on board the past 10 years.
Yeah. Well, most people were, right? You weren't alone. And the most ironic thing about my entire journey is that I consider myself a pretty tech-centric guy, right? I've always been an early adopter of technology. I learned about AWS from my father, who is the complete opposite. I mean, this is the guy who just got a smartphone, who still likes to navigate with the King's Atlas. Smartest person I've ever met, but definitely not an early adopter of technology. And I remember vividly, I was walking the flight line, working on airplanes at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and my dad sent me this email about the advent of the cloud and what Amazon's doing with the cloud. And for whatever reason, I read that, walking to this plane to go turn wrenches in 10-degree weather and freeze my butt off. And I went, oh, I need to learn about that. So I went home that night, and the rest is history. It was a love affair from day one.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before, trying to, change the status quo of, the data and analytics stuff, so I'm guessing you served in the military, and I'm guessing you were in the Air Force. Is that correct?
I was. Yeah, I spent 6 years, just shy of 6 years actually, in the Air Force. I started out turning wrenches on the B-1 bomber, which is the greatest aircraft to ever exist, most active aircraft since 9/11. So it's definitely been put through its paces.
I remember reading about those, like they were falling, like something about them falling apart as fast as folks could keep them in the air or something. Like they're pretty, so they needed good mechanics. I take it.
It's the most active aircraft since 9/11, but it's also the least mission capable aircraft. One of them in the history of the Air Force, meaning it's broken all the time. It was created during the height of the Cold War. The B-1B was originally nuclear capable to really act as a last a last option. Right, fly over Mach a long way, strapped with nuclear armaments, and it was originally designed to fly 1,000 flight hours. And we took the first one during one of my last deployments to 10,000 hours. It got extended to 18,000 hours after a couple of brass flew in and decided 18,000 was the magic number. And now they've gone far beyond that. It's just incredible. It's not an easy aircraft to work on. It was seemingly assembled around the internals, so it's not user friendly. And what a way for, kind of an ego-driven 18-year-old kid to really get a dose of reality, to say, hey, you're not all that, and this aircraft's, you're gonna love it, but it's gonna kick your butt on a daily basis. So
it'll whip you into shape. Apparently, yeah,
it really did. Yeah, it'll teach you to grow up really fast, and obviously being stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base means you deploy a ton, and so I got my first taste of that, I think 5 months in. They sort of said, hey, you're good enough. let's get you over the pond and have you grow up in real time. And so I did that for a few years, and then I moved to Ramstein Air Base on the C-130Js, which was like going from working on an old Yugo to working on a Toyota. It was just so reliable. It worked every time. And I had the good fortune to begin flying as an air crew member with them, and then got attached to NATO. So I was the least cool person on an aircraft every day of my life for years, because I'd fly with Navy SEALs and pararescue and Delta, and then little old, that the wings didn't fall off in desolate places, mostly in the former Soviet Union and Africa. So if ever you need travel advice to Africa, I can't say that I'll be a huge help, but the chances are better than most people, because I've touched every country in Africa.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, really, like no job is more important than the other when it involves keeping, the birds in the air. So one link in that chain is damaged or broken. Well, guess what? Everybody's going to have some problems. Exactly. It's almost like working in the enterprise space. Everybody has to pull some weight. So, well, thank you for your service. That's awesome. One question I have there, can you think of like any correlation, between your time and experience in the Air Force and your desire to, even want to become an entrepreneur? Or was that kind of like something that was part of your personality maybe before then?
I watched my dad go through the journey, right? Going back to Papa Graves, huge influence on me, but he was very involved in Medtronic early on, designing pacemakers. Went to the contract engineering group that designed the first Keurig coffee machine. And decided he was done with corporate life and struck out on his own. This is a guy who has 3 master's degrees. He's a master electrician, and started his own contracting company that ended up becoming the highest rated electrical contracting group in Minnesota, where I grew up. And just watching him go through that was super inspiring. I was old enough to recognize what he was going through, 14, 15 years old. And I got the bug. I knew that, whether I went to college in the future or no matter what I did, it was always going to lead to building a business of my own. And so I attribute him to why I'm here and how I caught that original bug. Of course, you mow lawns as a kid and that sort of thing. You have your hustle, but seeing him put something into place from scratch that was very real and not, a kid's side hustle or a hobby was really inspiring to me. So always kind of knew it was in the cards, but really glad I got to first experience the structure and the process of the military prior to starting out, because I think it helped shape a lot of my decision making and my leadership abilities today.
That's exactly what I was going to ask next. Were there, so you maybe had that in you, you learned a lot from, hey, if your dad can do it, you can do it. And, he, sort of powered you through, taught you a lot of things, but what did you take out of the military as far as leadership is concerned? And does it lend itself, the structure, everything that goes along with it, does it lend itself to, I'd say, does it arm you with, does it give you an edge as far as being an entrepreneur, like going through, the Air Force or whatever branch of the military?
I think so. Yeah. For whatever reason, I've always sort of extracted 3 core philosophies from what the military taught me to what I apply today. And, I've done my continuing ed, in leadership and whatnot. And it really has solidified my belief in what I learned there. The first is that you learn to suffer as a group in the military, right? There's no such thing as a solo struggle in the military. Like, it's the hardest thing that most people will ever do, but you're never alone. You always have people you can depend on. And even if you're in this sort of highly elevated macho position that's physically demanding and mentally demanding, there are always people who will check your 6, right? So you learn to depend on others, which I think is really important. The second, and it sort of ties in, is the military. If you think about the military and what it is, the Department of Defense, it's something like the 35th largest GDP equivalent in the world. It's gigantic. And so the question becomes, how does the military still retain the ability to move as fast as it does with all of that supply chain and all of those people and all of those moving parts? And the answer is delegation. The military is extremely good at delegating as absolutely far down the totem pole as possible. So you have strategic decisions being made up high, but there are still decisions being made lower on the totem pole on a day-to-day basis. And you train people how to make those decisions, how to perform that sort of cost-benefit analysis, if you will, and decide what's best and hit the throttle. So that delegation piece is massive. And the third piece is, if ever you meet someone from the SEAL teams or the pararescue teams, these are folks who, on the surface, you would rarely know are the caliber of practitioner that they are. They're gentle people. A lot of them are soft-spoken. They're wise and thoughtful. But if they need to, they can make the fangs come out, right? And I think that's an important distinction in business too, because a lot of entrepreneurs or business owners tend to bring as heavy a hand as possible all the time and say, it's about me, it's about what I decide, and you're going to do it and you're going to like it. But that distinction of saying, I'm going to let you make a decision. I'm going to, I'll be there to support you and go to bat for you. And if you need me, I'll let the fangs come out and let people know that I'm very serious. But otherwise, I've got a long fuse in terms of what it takes to get me to snarl. Those 3 elements are critical in any leadership function, but certainly in business as you're scaling. When you're lacking process, when you have lone wolves who sort of want to take things and do things on their own in a dark corner, having that ability to say, okay, I'm delegating to you, but you need to lean on the support system around you. Here are my expectations, and I'm going to guide you and be a champion of you to allow you to realize your goals. But if you need me, right, I'm going to be sitting right over here, and the axe is sharp, right? And I've got your back. So, hopefully I've distilled that in my team. I think they would say that I have, but that's all of the military that taught me. And frankly, it's the situations I was put in as an airman, that allowed me to sort of refine those abilities.
Yeah, I'm sure there's no book that can, there's no book that can kind of give you that experience. You can read about it and you can try and execute, but when you're in the heat of the moment and you're there and you are going through this for years, because I remember I read a book. I think it was called Team of Teams by General McChrystal. It was about how the military operates and how it had to evolve essentially for like cyber warfare, like it had to change and what those changes looked like. And everything you just kind of said was kind of baked in there, especially you have like the top level directives, but you have these sub teams that still can make decisions. Like they don't have to go all the way up the chain. They can make these decisions autonomously and move forward to, meet their goals. Really good book.
Yeah, exactly. It's the ability to say, hey, we're headed in this direction generally, right? Here's the altitude we need to fly at. Here's the speed we need to fly at. Y'all help us paint the flight plan, right? What waypoints we're going to use, how fast we're going to climb, if we're going to serve refreshments on board, whatever the case may be, right? Empowering people to make those decisions to drive the mission is not only more efficient for an organization, but it really promotes buy-in with individual contributors because they feel like they have a stake in the mission's execution and its ultimate success, which I think is, right, maintaining that why and making people feel empowered to achieve that why is important for them sticking around and continuing to want to push themselves and push their peers.
That's what I was going to say. Retaining talent. If you want folks to stick around, they have to feel that whatever you hired them in for, you hired them in to do a job. And if you limit and you say, hey, I'm only going to allow you to use 5% of your God-given talent, you can't use anything else. Well, that's not going to make a creative and efficient person very happy. So they're going to move on.
Yeah, and we all want to hire the best and brightest, and we discriminate on a piece of paper typically, right? What school did you go to? What were your prior experiences? I think the silliest thing a leader could do is go, okay, great. Now, William, you're going to sit in this box, and if you try and climb out of that box, I'm gonna push you back in. My whole philosophy is hire the absolute sharpest folks you can and stay the hell out of their way, right? Yeah. Be a vocal proponent for them. Help clear paths with your machete. I jump on grenades if you need to, right? Help them stay the course because there's a reason you hired them. It's not to fulfill a task. It's to fulfill a function, right? And a function is a lot wider reaching than just a series of tasks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that. That was really, I think every organization on the surface strives to do this, but the difference, I think, is in the ones that are actually willing to do what it takes to execute. I'm sure the bigger the company, of course, the harder this is to do, but yeah, goes without saying. So moving along, do you want to briefly, so you in the Air Force, exited the Air Force, and we talked about, what you do with North Labs. What kind of happened in between? So after you exited the military to when you founded North Labs, can you briefly describe that journey?
Yeah, I actually started my first group. It was called Cloud CTO, the Dropbox equivalent type of group. I founded it while I was in the military. And so I would be taking customer calls in Europe and Africa at the weirdest times of day to align with typically Minnesotan time, right? Central time. I could do that when I was 21. I couldn't do that now. But, so I ran that when I got out. I actually got out of the military 6 months early under a provision by President Obama. Typically, when they do force shaping, they look at the folks who are sort of the bad eggs, right? You're failing your physical tests. You've gotten reprimanded too many times. We're gonna let you out a few months early and have a nice day. Obama had 1 year where the force shaping requirements weren't all that much. They needed to shape like 671 or 700 personnel, something like that. And his instructive was, I know that some of you are just biding your time to get out. You have horizons outside of the military and good on you. So we're going to have you apply to get out. And so 7,000 of us applied. And you had to have letters of recommendation and college acceptance letters. And of course, I leaned on, hey, I'm running this business, right? And I was one of the 671 that were selected that year. They rolled me back and let me out 6 months early. It was one change in a system, and all of a sudden I was free. I couldn't believe how easy that was. So I ran that for just about a year, a little over a year after I got out, and I sold it. It wasn't anything spectacular, but I sold it to a group that wanted to acquire essentially the customer list and some of our technology. And I signed my life away for 2 years with a non-compete, essentially. You could be an individual contributor, but you're really not going to start a business that has anything to do with tech for 2 years. And so I went out to the West Coast. I was a software engineering contractor for groups, the tech startups, right? That are some fairly well-known names, helping them get to the cloud. Again, it's all I know, right? I'm not the sharpest software engineer by any means. I'd be hard pressed to ride the bench somewhere, but I knew a lot about the cloud and could help with the economic decision making and sort of the operational and product management side of things. And so helped several high growth tech startups over there. And the day my non-compete expired, literally I waited up 12/15. I had incorporated North Labs. It was originally going to be a startup incubator to help organizations build SaaS products because I had just done that on the West Coast. I had a few bucks in my pocket and I wanted to sort of make these micro investments in startups. That lasted about 6 months before I realized, like, hey, the landscape for cloud is even different now than it was when I first left it. I need to be back in this conversation, and I need to be working with organizations with budget and vision and, big desires for their art of the possible to help them achieve those goals. And we've been doing it ever since. So AWS has always been there. Originally, our work was more migration focused and DevOps focused. But 2017, 2018, I made the decision to say, hey, data is more interesting. It's more tangible. It has a more concrete investment thesis attached to it, right? An ROI thesis. And the way the landscape is shifting, I know that's something that's going to keep me really interested for a long time. And so that's where we sort of made that shift to really be focused on data analytics and AI within the AWS ecosystem.
That's a great decision. I got to say,
yeah.
It's funny. Like, why do you think so? Certain technologies are just come with like very deep problem sets to solve. Why is data and analytics so hard with large organizations, like mid to large market?
Yeah. To me, it's really about the accessibility of that data and the underlying management of that data. When you think about building software programs, right? You obviously have a finite flavor of programming languages you would consider modern, right? You could build in COBOL, but who's going to build in COBOL, right? Certain number of frameworks and architectures and that sort of thing. The interesting thing about data is we understand the impact it can bring, but making it accessible and trustworthy is very difficult, right? When you think about 2014, 2015 timeframe, most mid-market organizations had 40 data producing systems in their enterprise. That number has quadrupled in the last 9 years. And so there's so much data and that data is all structured differently. It's all named differently. It's all accessed differently, right? You hope that you can have API integrations and stuff like that, but some of your data systems you might have a paper-based data system, right? Push hard, take the bottom copy. That's a data system, right? It's archaic.
Hey, I'd use a fax machine like less than a year ago for something.
Exactly.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so data comes in all shapes and sizes and varieties. And the impetus of that is, how do we get all of this data to subscribe to the same laws of physics as each other so we can make inference with that data or derive insights from that data? And so it's that initial enablement. It's definitely not the sexiest part of data and analytics, right? Like, we like to think of LLMs and Gen AI and neural networks and stuff like that, which is I love to talk about, and we do that with our customers, not the neural network stuff, but Gen AI for sure. But it's that core foundation, right? You can build as big of a house as you want, but if you build it on the sod in your backyard, how long is that thing going to stand up, right? And so we talk a lot about foundational integrity of data. Is it solid? Is it secure? And is it trustworthy? Because if it's not, we can dream about that upstairs game room all we want. But if we're building on sod, we're never going to get to the point of ever being able to step foot in that game room. And that's where the gotcha is.
100%. I read somewhere on your website, the North Labs website, that North Labs doesn't focus, of course, like solely on the tech. On I think it was like the people, the processes, and the technology, sort of like holistically. And that was music to my ears because I've worked for some big companies over the years, and oftentimes, like I would say most of the time, the technology was, I don't want to say easy, but it was much easier than ironing out the people and the processes, because these processes, which are almost tied to people, and then people, you have turnover, and then it's like, okay, does anybody even own this anymore? Does it need to be revisited? What do we do with it? All these things are really complicated. What do you think as far as like technology problem versus like culture, process, and people? Like, is it like a 50-50 split? Does it vary between, organizations, or, how does that sort of get laid out?
Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm the genius who came up with that. That's called the golden triangle philosophy. And it's been an MBA book since the 70s, right? People, process, and technology, and how they work together. But I think it's so like, I feel like we tend to write off some very institutional thinking because this is a new conversation, right? AI is not going to subscribe to any of this. It's just going to do it. The reason why organizations focus on the what, William, is because it's the most attractive and frankly, the easiest part of the conversation, right? I can talk about comparative feature sets, about competing technologies till I'm blue in the face, and I can take all the time in the world, right? What's the difference between Amazon Redshift and Snowflake and Databricks and BigQuery? I can spend as much time as I want dissecting those marketing websites and that documentation and figuring out where they're the same and where they're different. The difficult question, right, is the why. Why do we care about doing this in the first place? Not because it's interesting or because I was on a panel with William and he said, if I don't think about it, I'm going to go out of business in the next 6 minutes, right? Why is it important to this organization and its mission to its customers? And then the how, right, which is the people and process side of things. How am I going to enable change management? How am I going to empower my people to use this technology for the greater good, right? Technology is not just some panacea where it's like build this system and don't have any workforce anymore, right? At the end of the day, technology has been designed to facilitate efficiencies for people. People are still using the technology. They're maintaining the technology. They're designing and implementing the technology. And I don't really know if there's a statistic or a ratio to use for the typical divide. What I will tell you is people spend several times more of their opportunity budget, if you will, on the what versus the why and the how. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had over the years where organizations say, I want to use Gen AI. I want to use this technology. And then you get into, well, why is this important? And it's just, right? There's no answer. And that's dangerous because there are organizations, right? If we subscribe to the fact that there's roughly a 90% failure rate in the data and analytics realm for projects, right? That's not my stat. That's a McKinsey stat. Take it for what you will. Say it's anywhere close to that. So if 90% of projects are failing with the conversation centered around best of breed technologies, yet there are still organizations today with successful data capabilities using technology that we would consider prehistoric. What does that tell us? The technology is the least important variable in that multivariate expression,
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Just based on my experience working in the, in the big enterprise space, you said that just perfectly. 100% agreed. And data. I remember the first time I was part of a data program. It was when cloud was ramping up, and it was like, hey, we're going to move all of our applications to the cloud in like a year or two, and it's going to be, great. These rows and rows of mainframes. Yeah, we'll figure out what to do with them when we have to. And we hit that where we were like migrating like some web front ends to the cloud, and there was some stuff in cloud, but hey, data's heavy. Data gravity is a real thing, and the challenges are felt very deeply when you decide that you want to change anything, because this stuff, again, it's heavy, hard to move. Just out of I guess out of nowhere, what does it mean to build a data program, just like on its foundational level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think building a data program is putting in place a system of record from your data sources that you trust to make decisions with, right? We can talk about more advanced capabilities all day, ML, Gen AI, what have you. At the end of the day, all of that is predicated on more efficient decision making for an organization. And that decision making can look several different ways, right? It can be descriptive, what happened in the past, historical performance. It can be predictive, what's going to happen in the future. It can be prescriptive, this is going to happen and thus we should do this, right? Or any combination, right? Even beyond that. But to me, it's about establishing trust in the digital footprint that's already being created by your systems, right? Systems aren't inherently wrong. If our data quality is bad, it's because the structure of that data hasn't been tended to, right? So if we can put it in a place where it's trustworthy and it subscribes to the same laws of physics as the other source systems that we have, we build a universe for ourselves that allows us to ask cross-pollination based questions of the business and arrive at inferences that historically we might not have or would have taken a long, long time to achieve via other means, right? That's the baseline. It all boils down to trust. Once you have trust within your data, the data that you have, you can be a little more confident that you'll have trust in the things you build on top of it. But until you have that trust, all you really have is an R&D experiment.
Yeah, science experiment 101. Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. That's great feedback, great insight there. And honestly, one thing I see a lot of is just a desire to say, hey, this problem has gotten too big. We just want an easy button. And some problems are not, easy to solve. They're very hard to solve, and they can take a lot of time, and usually with mid-market to large, maybe like enterprise organizations, they want results fast. They want them fast, and, it makes things difficult. How does North Labs, kind of balance that, the demands for quick, fast results when trying to solve such difficult problems that could be a combination of like legacy complexity, the people, the risk tolerance, and, lots of old processes?
In my mind, it's all about narrowing the aperture, right? And this is a little bit of a departure from what my industry likes to talk about, cloud partners, right? It's usually hey, let's go and change the whole darn thing. If we get enough butane, we can boil the ocean, right? And in my mind, that's it's a recipe for slow adoption and increased risk, right? And so when we approach a conversation with a customer, it's all about how do you dial back from, hey, we want to achieve this, right? One of Amazon's leadership principles is working back from the customer, and we really adhere to that. So we want to get here. What's the one thing we could do over the next 6 weeks that would allow us to move the needle in that regard with one group of stakeholders, with a data source or two and not 160 of them, right? And put something in place where people can go, I get it, right? And that's also, mind you, when we talk about trust, the a philosophy that some customers have when they first come to us is like, I want to engage on this project, but we first need to button up our data quality, period. What does that mean? Are we going to go into all 160 systems and treat them as the same priority as each other and button up data quality across that? You'll never get there, right? It's a 10-year project and tens of millions of dollars. And for what? That's undifferentiated work. But if we can narrow the aperture enough to say, okay, for example, we have a customer who wants to automate the creation of their manufacturer, and they want to automate with Gen AI the creation of their product manuals. Okay. We have the data systems. There's a lot of data systems in this organization, but we have a very specific use case. So how then do we focus on that subset of core systems? Now there are 4 instead of, I think, 110 in this organization. There are now 4 that we need to ensure the integrity of while we build these data foundations. And then we can use Amazon services, right? Like Textract and Bedrock and what have you, to begin combing through labeled data and putting that scaffolding in place. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about an 8-month investment thesis where executive stakeholders can look at that and go, I get it now. This used to take us four people 4 months to do, working full time. Now, instead of starting at 0, we're starting at 80% of the way done. And it can take 1 person 3 days. And then, mind you, if we need to translate or transcribe this into Portuguese, we can do that as well. And it takes 30 minutes, right? So that's where, if you really focus in, and right, it's not just we want to use Gen AI, we want to use our data, really finding what that narrowed aperture, that narrow focal point looks like, is that's our responsibility as experts in this realm, is to help find where that focal point should be and what that sort of vending machine of ROI that can be produced with it. Because again, focusing on the what will never lead you to positive ROI ever. So if you can narrow in, you have a better shot at solving that equation.
Love that. I absolutely love that. But I have a lot of things coming through my mind, but I'll land on one more question that I think is just interesting. Usually, at least my experience working for really large companies, is they see the new and shiny, and they just like say there's like a line of things that need to be done before that new and shiny can be effective. They don't start on the line of things. They just want to jump straight over the front of the line and use something new. And so, these days, kind of like we've talked about a little bit, you can't even talk data without talking AI and security. Are you seeing like some cognizant effort to say, okay, like, hey, we need to get our data under control. We need a data program. We need to understand our data in order for enable us to use it, I would say, is like a precursor to just jumping right into AI ML? Or are you seeing like in the industry that it's kind of like trying to hop straight into the, into the Terminator land?
We see a little bit of both. I think there's a big tendency, like you said, to just go, you know what, plug your nose, take off your shoes, jump in with both feet, and we'll figure out the less attractive stuff on the back end. Those organizations are going to have sort of a moment of reckoning, right? And the same thing, William, you were involved in early cloud days. The same thing happened with the cloud. We act like this is totally different. It's not. We had early organizations, like you mentioned, who went, you know what, push in the chips. We don't really know what's going to happen in the background. Got a lot of legacy application and legacy code running. Doesn't matter. Force it through. And those organizations, after 2 years, had to look up and go, oh my God, what have we done? There was no roadmap for this. It was just a brute force effort. And we are seeing that on the AI side. Now, there are, again, you go back to that narrowed aperture, right? And I will say that AI, Gen AI specifically, and ML has become the greatest catalyst for our foundational conversations that I've ever seen. Because people are very, very interested, right? They're glomming onto the idea of using referential learning mechanisms to improve business efficiency. And that's great. But if you can sort of reel them in and go, look, that's where we're going, and we're going to be able to show value for that in this shortened period of time. But while we're doing that, right, we're going to take this cross section of the layer cake. We're going to focus on the data infrastructure, the data quality, the data security, and then the enablement with the AI, and show how that whole stack comes together, even if it's such a super narrow sliver of the sort of whole use case. You can make a lot of inroads. So it's a mixed bag for sure. But the thing that I always sort of caution people with is, we read these stories of the big multinationals pushing the chips all in, right? And you can see story on story of, groups like Honeywell and groups like Siemens and whoever it might be, not to call them out by name, right? But like, these groups have a prerogative, right, to demonstrate that they're still hip. They're still a hip kid, even though they're a huge organization. Mm-hmm. And their market value is driven off of share price, not revenue and EBITDA, right? That's a contributing factor for sure. And so that's a different narrative than what I call the real world, where you're needing to show ROI and EBITDA and efficiencies, and it can't just be relegated to R&D or a part of a marketing effort, which is what the cloud was in early days. Hey, we're going all in with the cloud without knowing what we're doing. That's a marketing, it's part of a marketing campaign as well to show you're still a hip kid. So for those listening out there, right, I would say the future is super bright for incorporating AI and incorporating these advanced technologies. But just like in golf, which I love to do, just like in racing cars, which I love to do, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And making proper decisions that you can demonstrate value with along the way is super important. And anything else is, could get unwieldy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I say that probably every day to my kid. He plays travel ice hockey. Mm-hmm. Like, look, slow down. Think about it. Think about what you're doing with the puck. You have some time. Slow is smooth. Smooth is, I say that ad nauseum. He's tired of hearing it at this point, but it's such a good thing. You got to slow down in order to get better. It's not, everybody says, okay, crawl, walk, run. But usually what we try and do is take off sprinting and then realize we need to learn how to walk first. And then that humbles us again. And we got to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, we got to learn how to crawl first. We got to get moving a little bit before we can become advanced. So yeah, great perspective, great insight there. I did try to dig out some social media links and everything for you. The only thing I found, I think, was LinkedIn. Is there anywhere people can find you other than LinkedIn and the North Labs website?
Amazon reInvent. No, I'm not a big social media guy. I used to be, and I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. I welcome connections. I have conversations all the time with folks on there. So that is the best place, to reach me. And otherwise, my email address is just collin@northlabs.io, and people are free to reach out to me there. But I try to stay off of social media for my already scrambled brain running a scaling.
And for your sanity as well. Yeah.
Right.
There you go. All right. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, all the links that we've referenced throughout the show, they will be in the show notes. Thank you very much, Collin.
Such a pleasure. Love the show. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.